Hello internet friends, and welcome back to what is my personal favorite series on this channel. You all know, it's thrifting. I love to thrift around here. However, I won't actually be going out and thrifting in this video. I'm gonna recall like so much of my back catalog in this video and I'm pumped for it. But you all know, I have to have like a theme that I'm going for so that we can kind of intertwine everything that I want to talk about. Today, we are focusing on brands that you might not even have realized were once high-end designer, or in some cases, even haute couture. These would be the equivalency to like Gucci, Burberry, or the Dior of today. The fashion industry is such a bloated and confusing place, full of marketing schemes and trending styles that sometimes you don't even realize the well-made garments are littered all throughout the thrift store. I am such a huge fan of high-low fashion. It's very much how I have modeled my current wardrobe, but I think it's the direct opposite of what most people think it is. I pay more for my basics and less for my high-end because the thrift store and online resale websites are riddled with high-end that we just don't put the value in or realize what it once was. So let's dive deep into the brands of yesteryear yet again and discuss what to look for, what made them so good, and what the heck happened to them. Let's start out strong with one of my personal favorites, Bill Blass. Not the discount, licensed out brand Bill Blass, the original designer finds. You can walk into any thrift store and probably find Bill Blass, but knowing what the original brand looked like is knowing what high-end quality is. Okay, so Bill Blass started out working for Anne Klein. We're gonna dive into her a little bit later, don't you worry. After working for Anne Klein, he went and worked under Anna Miller and Maurice Rentner. The two companies merged and he became the head designer. Also, fun fact, this was all after he served in World War II, so not only is he a famous American designer, but he's also a veteran. Also for context, Anne Miller, Maurice Rentner, they were brother and sister, so that's gonna come into play in a minute. After the two companies merged, he started making designs featuring his own name on the labels. Eventually, he bought the company from the brother and sister and renamed it Bill Blass, becoming one of the first American designers to build a fashion house under his own name. He designed dresses for many famous names, including Jackie Kennedy Onassis, and someone I feel like I have personally modeled my entire wardrobe off of, Lauren Bacall. But Bill Blass also paved the way for how a lot of the current fashion industry works. At one point in time, he had as many as 97 licensing agreements for his label, including Blass Sport, handbags, fragrances. Basically, anytime you see a brand launch a fragrance label, just know it's a cash grab. You're a designer that needs to fund their next runway show, start a fragrance label. But old Bill knew the only way he could continue funding his dreams of designing couture was to sell to the masses. Nothing inherently wrong with that, but you can start to see how easily a brand can get watered down. And I think Bill Blass is an excellent case study for that. After his retirement in the 90s, his brand wasn't really about the creations anymore, and it slowly drifted away. Quick pause before we get back into vintage fashion history. I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, that is Skillshare. I've been taking a class on Skillshare called How to Improve Your Writing in 10 Simple Steps by Tasman Hansman. It has honestly been such a game changer for me. It's helped me with stepping outside my comfort zone and my writing and creative process. The class has encouraged me to read books and articles about what I want to write about and understand the tone I want to capture and the pacing. The class has also encouraged me to understand the weak spots in my writing, and oftentimes it's your audience who can provide that information for you, and she has broken that down in such a kind and informative way. I'm really lucky to have a comment section that I can refer back to and get a pulse on how my presentation is received. And as much as criticism can be hard to take, it really can help you understand some reoccurring things that will help improve your creative writing over time. Skillshare is a platform with thousands of creative classes taught by world-class professionals. It's perfect if you're trying to build a creative habit or level up your skills. The first 500 people to use my link in the description or scan the QR code will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, plus 20% off your first year. So get started today. Next up, let's dive into the works of Geoffrey Beene. Now, this is probably a hard second for me. I don't know, this list is just so good. I can't pick a favorite. I just love his work for how elegant it once was. Definitely be careful though, because the 1970s, he did love his polyester, but he wasn't just Argyle prints and sweaters and off-the-rack cashmere and watches that we know today. Jeffrey Bean started his training at the height of Dior's new look and the rise of Elsa Schiaparelli, who he found most of his inspiration from. If you don't know who Elsa Schiaparelli is, just do me a favor. I'll link some videos for you. She was amazing. His early years were spent making interpretations of designs coming out of Paris until he opened his own label in 1963. It wasn't until then, though, that he could really experiment with his own creations. Bean was really good at noticing cultural shifts, and he realized women didn't want stiff gowns anymore and uncomfortable proportions. He started studying fashion beyond the current styles of the time, and I think the most interesting part to me is he looked at everyday wear spanning across the last like 500 years. He would go into museums and study what people were wearing. What outfits did we have artifacts from? And he wanted to learn how women moved in the clothes all throughout history. And I find it really interesting because you can start to see kind of that like prairie style or peasant style dressing. Like, it's interesting that you could really see where he pulled some of his influences from, even in a historical context. But like most topics on my channel, it's also important to recognize he was also a really savvy business person. He realized how to play the game. He bought out his investors, so he owned the company and had a hit fragrance line that kept the company afloat so he could continue making his creations. He also came out with a handful of diffusion labels, including Beanbag, which is a truly brilliant name, but his goal was to make sure to keep the same styles in his diffusion labels and swap out lower quality fabrics to make the garments more affordable. A practice we see very often today with collaboration lines like H&M, Uniqlo, Nike, to name a few. This next one, I guarantee you, I promise you, if you have frequented a thrift store within the last 10 years, you have seen this brand, and you probably have no idea how important the history is behind this brand. Willy Wear by Willi Smith. Understanding the current fashion landscape and streetwear style is understanding Willy Wear by Willi Smith. You've likely come across this brand at the thrift store and had absolutely no idea how important it is to today's modern aesthetics. It's impossible not to look at ads from Willi and not see the impact and influence he had on today's fashion. Smith started out designing clothes for the brand Digits, and later, after the company folded, he started his own label. He focused mainly on sportswear and everyday attire, but he walked a fine line between creation and accessibility. He didn't want to just focus on high-end clothing or clothing for the elites. Considering this was the 70s and 80s, that's really all the market cared about at the time. So this was very rare. People were obsessed with the lifestyles of the rich and famous. So for him, it was about finding a way to connect the style of the time with the new emerging mindset of the everyday consumer. Styles were oftentimes unisex and sizes were scaled to fit multiple sizes. He also really understood the idea of self-expression, and I think this quote will instantly make you fall in love with him. "My designs are so simple. I want them to be interpreted. I'm not a statement designer. You don't have to wear me from head to toe. I like thrift shoppers who put other things together creatively with my clothes." I mean, if that's not the whole theme of this video and so many other videos on my channel, I don't know what is. Unfortunately, Smith passed away in 1987 and the brand filed for bankruptcy in the 90s. Streetwear style at this time wasn't so much about what was on trend, but was instead part of a counterculture. You had the trickle-down effect of fashion, where whatever was on the runway would eventually show up in department stores. But unlike today, where streetwear shows up on the runway all the time, back then it was a new emerging form of fashion. Also, unfortunately worth noting, his brand did file for bankruptcy and the label was purchased and relaunched and sold exclusively at TJ Maxx. If you haven't seen my TJ Maxx video, I would highly recommend it, but it explains a lot of how this kind of stuff happens. Okay, next up, we got Pierre Cardin. Pierre Cardin has an insane career spanning across 70 years. 70 years! If you think of Pierre Cardin in his prime, most likely the Space Age comes to mind. But just like Blass & Bean, which kind of sounds like a really predatory injury law firm, he studied under Schiaparelli and Dior. He started his own label in 1950, making designs of what he thought would be what we're wearing in the future. he was a little off, honestly. I don't think he really captured the essence of 2025. But you know what? That lady's wearing a white t-shirt, so at least he got that right. We wear a lot of white t-shirts. He made the car wash dress, the bubble dress, and also, can I just note, these were made of wool. So the craftsmanship and detail was wild. The image we have of the future from the 50s and 60s was shaped so much by Pierre Cardin. From collarless suits to mini skirts flared out, Plastic Fantastic was exactly what old PC thought we would be doing. He did get that one right, at least. But one thing Cardin was really good at was licensing his brand out. Cars, fragrances, chocolate bars. Need some sheets? Pierre Cardin. Need a couch? Pierre Cardin. Need a house? Pierre Cardin. Okay, he didn't actually do that one. He didn't go that far, but you get my drift. But also, are you noticing a running theme around here? Licensing and ruthless business is legit the only way to survive. He slapped his name on a lot of perfume bottles, but he also just really liked creating. He understood the fantasy of fashion, saying, "The dresses I prefer and those I invent are for a life that does not yet exist." He always set his imagination to the future. He really didn't get it right, but he loved making dresses for the fantasy of it all. The what if, but he also understood the business side of things really well. He was one of the first haute couture designers to launch a ready-to-wear collection, something that is the norm and the standard in today's designer brands, but during his time, this was revolutionary and something most designers turn their noses up at. And now it's an integral, non-negotiable part of the fashion business model. So essentially, yes, that is why you can find his brand across any thrift store, you name it. You can walk in there and probably find Pierre Cardin today. But you can start to understand why his original pieces hold so much value, but you can also see why the brand eventually went to the wayside, because he was just essentially putting his name on anything and everything. And brand equity and brand value can so easily be torn apart when your brand name is everywhere. I think right now the current landscape of fashion is proving that you have to have that kind of fine line of your brand being well known, but also not everywhere all the time. Let's move on to the brand that I have probably found the most across my career, and I'm pretty dang proud of that, but also mainly probably because it has so many diffusion labels. Emmanuel Ungaro. Ungaro trained under Balenciaga and Courrèges and went on to have a career that spanned across 4 decades. He also, just like Pierre Cardin, contributed quite a bit to the look of the space age, but I think he was most well known for his loud prints. In the 70s, he launched a hit fragrance line. Surprise, surprise. The height of his career was in the 80s, loud prints, colors, and bold prints. But by the 90s, with grunge being the big scene, his prints went out of fashion and he didn't pursue the shift in trends, and the company started to struggle. He was independent for so many years, and he didn't play by the popular playbook of diffusion labels and mega fragrance lines until the 90s, when he sold the majority stakes of his company to Ferragamo. And after that is when you started to see more and more sub-brands pop up under the label. But in 2005, he retired and sold the label completely, marking the end of such an era for fashion. He was known as the last grand couturier. This is the role of master and apprentice. He studied under Cristobal Balenciaga, not the Balenciaga that you know today. This is yet another one of those brands that was like shut down, revived. Balenciaga used to be beautiful. The new Balenciaga, a little different. But he was the last legacy of the torch that started with the fashion world as we know it today. The majority of these houses are all owned by mega conglomerates. They started swooping in and buying up all of these companies and shaping the current landscape that we see today. And you can look at this in so many different ways, because sometimes it feels like so yucky and elitist when you think about these clothes just being made for like 1 or 2 people and they only get the beautiful pieces. But at the same time, that's where the quality is. That's where these pieces hold that rich history of quality and integrity and design. And it's less about the old guard or the keeping of the traditions, because I understand everything needs to be in a constant state of change and evolution. So I don't necessarily want the old ways back, but the business side of things definitely makes these fashion houses harder to digest and stand behind. At this point, in so many ways, we're just holding up legacies. But I think quality and the study of fashion is where the practice holds so much symbolism and importance. And one thing that I find fascinating, and I'm really interested to see where it actually goes, the Roche is actually in talks of acquiring Ungaro. So I don't know, could be interesting. Last, but most certainly not least, Anne Klein. I've done little snippets and wondered if I should ever do a standalone video for her, but honestly, I feel like this is probably the best possible space that I can talk about her and her work. I think a standalone video just wouldn't do justice to her legacy because I would be comparing it to modern day Anne Klein. That just doesn't feel relevant to me anymore. Anne Klein shaped so much of women's modern wear and helped usher in a new era of career wear. She saw the shift happening before her and wanted to dress the women changing the world. She once said, "Clothes aren't going to change the world, the women who wear them will." She was who pioneered the idea of the coordinated wardrobe. So think like modern day capsule wardrobe of today. That's essentially what she was helping us build. She was taking out the exhausting idea of needing to buy matching everything for whatever look you're wearing. Trousers that went with your entire wardrobe. That was her mindset. In 1948, Anne Klein and her then husband started the brand Junior Sophisticates, making clothes for petite women. She was the first American designer to take men's clothing and rework them for women's use. I say first American designer because Coco Chanel was technically the first person to do that, but like, we're not really a fan of Coco Chanel's legacy around here. She also was super revolutionary in selling clothing as separates. Excuse me, what? Separates? Just the fact that that wasn't already a thing is like mind-blowing to me. Like, you're telling me somebody had to go out there and say, hey, you know what? Women actually don't want to have to buy the whole look. Like, they want to create their own look. They don't want to be told they have to wear this with this. Like, let's give them the chance to, you know, build their wardrobe that way. Also, not to mention, like, you're telling me that jacket can't go with that skirt, and so therefore you have to buy a whole outfit to go with just that one piece. So yeah, thanks to Anne Klein, we can mix and match. Groundbreaking. Also, I'm just gonna throw out there was the historical moment, the Battle of Versailles, that took place where they had 5 American designers and 5 French designers do a fundraiser. But beyond the fundraiser, it was about who was making the better designs, America or France. And at the time, this was pretty wild because like France was the leader in, you know, haute couture and design and just fashion in general. But Anne Klein, out of all the designers that came together, she was the only female. That's so crazy to me. And honestly, it's still a reflection of what's going on in fashion. There's still very little female representation when it comes to these fashion houses and the level of design and creativity. And it really blows my mind because it's like, hello, like, wouldn't you want a female designing for the female body? So yeah, we desperately needed Anne Klein. And I think as far as American designers go, she was one of the greats. Unfortunately, she passed away in 1974, and as you can imagine, the brand just isn't the same. So every single one of these brands, I guarantee you can find at the thrift store at some point in time, but it's keeping an eye out for those labels that you know were from their like designer reign. That's the most important part. Also, hot tip for anybody who is at the thrift store and trying to look up labels, I have recommended this website so many times throughout my career, but vintagefashionguild.org. Everything you need to know right there. You want to see what decade, what year that label is from, just type it into Vintage Fashion Guild. It's a brilliant website. I'm so thankful that it exists because yeah, it's just a treasure trove of labels. It's so weird to think of any brand going to the wayside, but we have the brands of the past as perfect examples that it can and probably will happen. But what brands will it be? The fashion industry is a mixture of complex art history and business and human exploitations. I think that's why so many of us are so turned off by the current state of fashion. It's hard not to see how much licensing and watering down of labels takes the brand and rips it of its value and art currency. A lot like current modern day collaborations. The more you learn about the history and what has become of these companies, the harder it is to still see it as art. But fashion is art. Just like the movie industry, just like the publishing industry, you have your business sucking the life out of it, but at its core, it's humans just trying to express themselves. The current fashion world is just big conglomerates. LVMH owns so many vintage fashion labels that we once coveted, but they aren't even technically the same company they once were. Schiaparelli, Courrèges, Loewe were all brands that were closed down for many years and then bought up by someone else to revive the label and technically capitalize off the name recognition. You have brands in the licensing graveyard like Kenzo, Halston, and Biba, and so many countless others. Even Dior at one point in time was licensed out and sold less as designer and more as mass retail. That's why you can find an acrylic Dior sweater in just about every single thrift store across America. It's learning these things that you realize labels aren't always everything, nor are they a true indication of quality. So much of it is just marketing. But you would be surprised how many labels are at the thrift store you had no idea once retailed for a lot of money. A lot of people throw around the word the democratization of fashion, and it's usually used in reference to clothes getting cheaper and faster. I quoted Jonathan Anderson using it in my last video in reference to his Uniqlo collaboration. But to me, this is the true democratization of fashion. There is so much clothing already in existence and even more being made every day. But each time you go to the thrift store, you can level the playing field and realize the good stuff isn't being sold by Miu Miu for $17,000. It's probably at the thrift and just needs a good delicate hand soak and hang dry. I also want to note that the majority of these brands are all things that are easily accessible in America. And I would be really, really curious to know, because I've started to notice there's a lot of people from other countries that watch my videos, and I would absolutely love anybody to share the brands that you find in your country. I know this is such a location-based experience. For me to sit here and talk about American designers and French designers, it could look so different all across the globe. And I would just absolutely love to hear what brands you find so much at the thrift store, and maybe you've realized these were once designer pieces. That is it for today's video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I had so much fun researching this video. Honestly, with each deep dive, I just learned so much more about these brands that I have come across for so many years, and it's so cool to have the opportunity to do this now. You know, my career didn't always allow me to have this amount of time and freedom to do this research, and I've always kind of made it a point to learn everything that I can. But for me to have the opportunity to sit down and read these books and read these articles is just so cool that like you guys want to hear about it, and you guys are just as interested in it as I am. And that just really means a lot, because I've spent my entire adult life, you know, researching this stuff and being so enamored by vintage fashion and thrifting. And I think it's really cool that you guys are also equally fascinated by it. So thank you. I love learning with you guys. And yeah, as always, if you're new around here, I might have a couple extra videos for you right here and right here. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.